Well, we did it. We finally got the sound back up and working, and I'm happy to report that the rest of the podcast goes through without a single glitch. So, if you haven't seen part one, quickly go over to our stories on our website and take a looky-loo, because this podcast will make absolutely no sense. We go into much more detail about the two coffees that we currently are roasting, and I really hope that you are buying them both side by side so you get a true understanding of what terroir and variety do to the flavor of coffees. Also in this podcast, we discuss some off-topic subjects. Interestingly, we did get into a little bit of history about the Medellin gang and its impact, very negative, on the region. So anyway, I hope you enjoy part 2 of this 2-part podcast. As always, thanks for supporting small business. You're back.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the last thing I heard was you were saying it's a small city. Most of the population's in the valley.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's Bogota is it's only half an hour a flight away, but road wise is about 7 hours.
I remember.
So, yeah.
12 hours by bus.
Yeah, and the roads back then were a lot worse. Now they've invested a lot in road infrastructure around here. But yeah, it's really hard to think about managing a cafe or operations away. We're growing, but we're still a small team, and we're still building kind of our leadership team at our cafe levels, and that's the hardest thing for us. Not more than just finding the locations, and I think we would have the chance to open more stores, but being able to do that and knowing that we would be able to, train the right people, train them enough time, have enough, high level managers for our cafes to manage them and keep our quality standards and the way we want to run operations. I can't think of it, still more than what we have, or once we feel we can do another one, we'll do it, but it's not something that we can grow fast.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, you know what you can do, and definitely keep it within your wheelhouse. And
and the same for exporting too. Like, to be honest, we don't have a major business plan. That's a good thing about being a family business too, is that we really don't have big investors or anything pressuring us to grow at a certain rate or be profitable at a certain rate. Like, we can just really look at the long term and see, okay, what do we want to do? What are we good at? What size does that mean? And then just kind of stick to it and kind of learn on the way. And we've been, obviously we've grown a lot in the past 8 years, but it's never been, crazy growth from one year to the next. It's just been consistent kind of growth of setting up our structures, being able to find enough coffees for the new programs that we're getting, being able to keep that consistent. And it's just always kind of the big deal. And yeah.
Yeah. And so, sticking to the family-owned business, I mean, how long have you had the land for the farms?
About 40 years.
40
years. The first farm actually was my father, as I mentioned to you, worked in the city, and he inherited some money from his great aunt. So basically, yeah, my grandmother's sister, who passed away, and she didn't have any children, and she really liked my father, so she left him a small inheritance at that time.
Nice.
And his dream was to be able to have a small piece of land, somewhere in the countryside around Medellin, and he purchased that small farm, and it happened to have an abandoned coffee plantation there. It was only a couple of hectares big, but it was completely abandoned. So he started taking care of it, cleaning it out, fertilizing it, pruning and getting everything. And that was the initial way we got into coffee, and it just became his passion. He would go every weekends and early in the mornings. It's actually not that far away from Medellin. It's only about an hour away. So a lot of times he would drive really early mornings to take care of business there, and then drive back to be able to be in the office at 9 o'clock and
Wow.
doing his business. So. Yeah, that's the way we started. And actually, the person that managed that farm is still with us, and it's our general manager for all of our growing operations. And he's been up
Wow.
with us for 38 years now, 39.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, he's about to retire, and we don't know what we're gonna do without him.
um, well, good luck with that.
Yeah,
That's a 38 years. That's a lifetime of knowledge. 39 years. That's a lifetime of knowledge.
yeah. Gabriel is definitely one of the. I mean, he's not only an agronomist. He's a road builder. He's a wet mill builder. He's those sort of I call him the coffee da Vinci. Like he'll take care of everything. He'll whatever
Wow.
he can't take care of it, he'll invent a solution for it. So yeah,
Wow.
he's a good guy.
That's great. Irreplaceable.
Yeah,
You might have to split his job up into 10 different roles.
probably.
And then, uh, I remember you speaking to this when I was back there, and I remember, Medellin went through some hard times through the 90s, I believe, and maybe even the 80s, 90s, and I know you had to leave. Like, what was it like growing up during that time, like, through the 90s?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the 80s and 90s were kind of a rough patch for Colombia. I mean, it was a mix of a lot of things, both political and economic wise. Um, but yeah, the 80s and 90s were really hard. First with drug cartels. Obviously, in the 80s was the kind of heyday of the Medellin cartel. Um, and then the late 80s, early 90s was where the actual final war between the government and that cartel took place, and that's when um, things got nasty really quickly in terms of bombs in Medellin, kidnappings in Medellin, just to scare people, um, massive shootings and stuff. It was a really hard time. I was actually very very young at the time. I think my brothers were lived through it more consciously. But we did have to leave Medellin in 91. So I was 5 years old, 4 years old.
Mm.
Um, and we had to leave the city for 3 years and then come back after Escobar had been killed, and the drug cartels were changing, I guess, because the drug cartels have never really disappeared. They just obviously changed a lot, and they don't have the power that they had in the 80s and or late 80s and early 90s. But also, it was the time when the guerrillas, which is a left-leaning guerrilla group, went deep into the drug trade as well, so it became a lot more powerful, and they started to control a lot of territory in rural Colombia. So, for example, we weren't able to go to our farms from around 1999 to 2003, 2004. So for about 4 years, we couldn't visit our farms. And Gabriel, our farm administrator, would have to go at uneven times for short periods of time, um, because we would get extorted, and if we didn't pay the extortion, we would get kidnapped or worse. So it was hard times, to say the least. It's just kind of funny to talk about it, kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's incredible how far we've gone and how quickly we've changed. Obviously, there's a lot of issues in Colombia still. There's even a lot of municipalities, or not a lot, but there's some municipalities that it's better not to visit, if they're near areas where illegal crops are being grown, because they would be under the the power of illegal armed groups. But there's no the powerful left leaning guerrilla groups are not there anymore. The big cartels are not there anymore. So that illegal power is less concentrated, and there's the rule of law has come back, like strongly in cities and major towns, and basically everywhere except really far into kind of the middle of nowhere, where sometimes we work in coffee because we like to find those unique places that still grow old varieties and high altitudes and stuff. So some municipalities are that we work with, and sometimes we can't visit. But yeah, things have changed a lot.
Of course, yeah.
The situation in Colombia is a lot better, and I mean we have to kind of accept our past and kind of learn from it, and understand it, and we can't deny it. But the reality of what Medellin is right now is completely, or Medellin and Colombia is right now, is completely different from what it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, even from when I was traveling through there and have traveled, I've been down to Colombia quite a few times, and I've never really felt out of two place. I mean, maybe except for, I think, crossing the border, was it Huila into Cauca? I think we drove through there. If hopefully I've got my geography right. And yeah, I mean, the high altitude there, and then there was like, a military presence and like tanks rolling around. But
Yeah, you still see. I mean, you still see a lot of police and military presence around in roads and stuff. But yeah, things have changed a lot, and again, I mean, it's a past that we're definitely not proud of, and that's why we get sometimes kind of pissed when there's tourism around that those drug years. There's a lot of people that are coming to Medellin because of the um, our past, and want to see, where Pablo Escobar died or whatever. It's like anything that kind of honors that, we get a little pissed because it was just, and anybody that wants to paint Pablo Escobar as a Robin Hood is just completely wrong. Um,
yeah,
so anything that ideolo makes an idol of the drug cartels is something that we don't really like, but we can't deny kind of the past and what happened, and the lessons that we learned from it, and hopefully the city will never see something like that again.
yeah. Well, thank you for talking about it. I guess a lot of people, would be unaware of how the locals feel about that, and you being a local there, thanks for sharing, and I guess opening our eyes just that little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, we're lucky. We just haven't had to go through that in Australia or in my time here in America. So thank you. Um, let's move. Let's bring the story back to coffee, and in particular, travel plans have been able to happen during 2020. So the coffees that we've just put on contract and I guess currently en route, or maybe hopefully they'll be in America very soon. Can you tell us a little bit about the two lots that we secured from you?
Yeah. So we're basically, they represent kind of two areas where we're working with. The Fabian lot comes from a producer in Cauca, which is one of our strongest programs. It's been where we basically started our allied producer program back in the day. Um, and Fabian is a strong member of the community in San Antonio, which is the small. So INSA is the municipality, but INSA is really big. INSA is one of the actually biggest municipalities in Colombia by territory. Um, but we work specifically, primarily in a town called San Antonio, which is where we have kind of our base operations there. There's a family called the PJMWay family that helps us to source all this coffees from the community, and they have a small warehouse. They send us samples. We actually finance the lab in order to cup there. And Fabian has been one of our early members of that project. He's a leader in the community. He has really good coffee, primarily a variety called Tabi, which is not very common. And actually, it's not necessarily those varieties that say it's always going to be amazing, right? Like there's a lot of variety within Tabi, the tabis that we've seen in Insta are have been really nice. So we really like those coffees, and the Fabian lot we really loved, and we're happy that's gonna end up in a good home. And yeah, Insta is just it's a wonderful municipality. It's near the Nevado del Ruiz volcano. It's right in the middle of what we call the Macizo Colombiano, which is this mountain range where most of the big rivers in Colombia are born. And it's just a really beautiful area to visit and to work in. And the coffees are just superb. A lot of altitude. All of them are usually above 18 to 1900 meters. Yeah, we really like that coffee and that origin. The Reinaldo Parra, which is the other lot that you purchased, one of our newer programs in Tolima. We actually visited Reinaldo just a little bit before COVID hit. He has a small farm near Ibagué, which Ibagué is the capital of Tolima. I'm getting a really crazy kind of light here. I'm gonna try to move a little bit.
It's okay.
So, and I'm actually where I'm actually almost never are. I'm in our administrative offices. I'm usually at the mill or at the shops, and this is actually my father's office, which has really he does a lot of other things than coffee. So I'm almost never here. But yeah, so going back to Reinaldo, yeah, Reinaldo is a new producer in the program. We started working with him last year. He has a really nice Caturra plantation near Ibagué. Really nice guy. He'd had some kind of negative experiences with specialty, promises that weren't kept, and a lot of variability in terms of how things work. So we've been working with him to develop kind of a trust. And being able to purchase his coffee now this is the second harvest that we've been able to purchase his coffee at the same price levels, and that's a major part of what we do. It's like developing those relationships and that trust. And like you were saying before, when you first met me, that we looked very young. Once we go to these communities and we do these meetings and everything, and Leo, who works with me, is also. He's not as, he's a little, we're both, I guess, getting older, but we still look young compared to your average coffee buyer in Colombia, because, coffee buyers internationally are usually, young people, etc. But the local buyers here are usually, old guys, with a big belly, a poncho, a hat, very traditional guys. So you come here with a t-shirt and jeans and, kind of young, and tell them that you're going to buy all this coffee, and they're like, are you for real? It's like, you're going to actually pay for this. And it's like, we always turn around and said, hey, the good thing about being young is that we're going to be here for a long time. Like, we want to be here for decades, not for, a year and then, come back with nothing next year. So, I kind of went on a tangent there, but yeah, Reinaldo is a really nice guy, and we're really excited to have him in the program. And the area near Ibagué is actually a region that's not really known for specialty, because Tolima usually gets attention in planadas, and kind of up in the north. But here near Ibagué, there's a region called China Alta, where we think there's a lot of potential, and we're developing a program there with several producers, not only Reinaldo, but other producers in the area. So we're really excited about the potential there. So yeah, that's a little bit about those two coffees, but I think they represent really interesting regions, and really kind of the work that we're trying to build with producers down here.
Yeah. So I guess that has been a challenge for you, being a young entrepreneur and getting out into the hills and trying to convince people to work with you. I hadn't thought of that as being a challenge.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most interesting parts of what we do. It's like, and not only building the relationships, but also what's most complicated for us, I think, because people in Colombia, we trust people easily. Like, we as long as we feel that there's human warmth and that we're being talked to directly, etc. We're not very hard to trust people. So we've been able to develop those relationships, get that age barrier done over with, and really show them once you come back year after year and you keep paying these high prices and you promise a premium that comes, all that sort of thing is just kind of builds, and the word of mouth is just really our biggest, our biggest help. Farmers will tell other farmers that we're purchasing great coffee at great prices, and they'll come to us knocking the door and saying, hey, we want to deliver to your programs. The hardest thing is developing the logistics behind it, right? Like being able to, sometimes it's really hard for a consumer, definitely, and even a roaster that travels, once he kind of starts seeing the territory, starts understanding really how complex it is to turn a small day lot from a producer into that final export lot, put in on a ship. It's not just traditional logistics. It's very complicated to be able to keep tab on all these small lots, cut through all of them, keep them separate, make sure to make decisions accurately in terms of how to blend them if you're blending them, or keeping separate if you're keeping separating them, and have that traceability down to that second premium, because we always want to pay that second premium depending on the quality. So we have to say, okay, this export lot, which was a blend of X and Y and Z, has 10 producers in there, each delivered how many kilograms, pay that premium depending on the kilograms that they delivered, and everybody gets their check. Like we've paid checks that are $5 because somebody delivered 15 kilos and he got a small premium for those 15 kilos. But every cent gets paid in terms of that second premium, and that is something that we've been kind of building on for the past 8 years, and it's definitely one of the hardest things that we have to do. But it's fun, working in. We get to know and see so many beautiful, interesting parts of Colombia that definitely my friends that live here in Medellin will never get to see, and never get to meet all these people that we get to meet. And it's a little exhausting sometimes, but it's definitely a fun part of the job.
Sure. And are you still playing around with special prep or unique prep when it comes to fermentation? I remember you were playing around with sort of like anaerobic fermentation. And did you double down on that, or did you sort of pull away?
It's funny. We're like when we started talking about like cold fermentations, it was really weird for everybody because there wasn't any talk about fermentation at the time. So like 8 years ago, we developed our first cold fermentation tank and tried that out and did a bunch of experiments around that, and try to create an idea behind controlling fermentations. We've come around quite a bit from there, and it's all based on experience. We think that there's this world of marketing that loves those sort of things, and everybody can do their own thing and decide how to do their own thing, but we feel that it's kind of gone off a cliff sometimes. It's like it's just everything specialty has to now be anaerobic, or has to be some what's the name of the other one, Maceronic carbonation, whatever, like just a crazy name for it to be specialty. But what we came to see after so much experience working with this, back in the day when nobody was talking about cold fermentations or controlling fermentations, or we even bought a bunch of yeast from Y yeast and tried wine fermentations and beer fermentations, and we did all of these sort of crazy experiments and spent a lot of money that I probably shouldn't have spent trying out with all this sort of stuff. But every time we got back, especially when we started working with allied producers, and we always got back to amazing cups of coffee that were fermented in these, very rustic tanks that, didn't really have the complexity that people try to add to it in order to make them special. And we just started to see what we could learn from what the producers were doing. And a lot of things came from that are pretty simple. And that's, I think, the power of it is kind of the simplicity behind it, because for us, specialty, I mean, we have nothing against, a big farm like us investing heavily into, equipment and stuff to do crazy stuff. But coffee at the end is a small player's game. It's like 99% of producers out there are small. They won't be able to do, a cold fermentation tank, right? Or understand, crazy fermentations that are being proposed to them. But a lot of these small farmers are doing really simple stuff that end up being amazing coffees, and they do it because of tradition. They do it because of practicality. One example is, for example, what we're doing a lot now in our farms, which is a mixed fermentation process where we mix different days of picking together. So we started seeing that some producers that we work with were doing these crazy long fermentations for about 5 days, and they weren't getting any, even not even like dirty, fruity coffees. Because I mean, some people like that dirty kind of fruity, really fruity coffee, really winey. But we're not even talking about crazy profiles like that. They were just getting really clean, really complicated or complex profiles from long fermentations, and they weren't getting any of the vinegars, any of the wininess, booziness out of long fermentations that you see elsewhere. And what we realized is that they, by adding a new batch of coffee, they were raising pH levels back again. They were dropping the temperature, and you would be able to do longer fermentations without the higher pHs and the higher temperatures that end up having boozy coffees. And they were doing it out of practicality because they had very little coffee and they would wash only once a week. So they would mix whatever they were picking every day and then ferment and then wash at the end. And that's one of the things that we now promote the most among our growers and our farms, is to do that mixed fermentation. Sometimes it's 5 days, sometimes it's 3 days, depending on the temperature that you have in your wet mill. That very simple, classical fermentation, amazing coffees, and so we've kind of gone back to basics, right? We've kind of gone back to how things can be done, and things that can be expanded too. It's like things that we can do in the different areas where we work, and I mean, yeah. So
yeah, I mean,
no cold fermentations now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can only relate to, coffee roasting, and I throw around this term that we call analysis paralysis, and you can dive down this rabbit hole, collecting data, experimenting, airflow this, drum speed that, and you go down that rabbit hole, and then you sort of come right back to the circle again and go, oh, if I just roast it the traditional way, like this way, you sort of you come full circle.
Yeah.
And I like, the takeaway there. I like that, extended 5-day fermentation. Quickly, are you doing that dry, like the traditional dry fermentation, or is that in water?
Sometimes growers do it because that's, again, practicality. Some growers have tanks that retain water, so they can
Yeah.
do it in cold water, in water, and they would change every day the water. Some of the growers are doing them in without water because their tanks can't hold water. We haven't really seen. Usually, temperatures rise obviously faster when there's no water. So usually that's when you start being practical and say, okay, let's try this 3 days instead of 5, or do it for a short amount of time. But yeah, it's normally with water, and it's normally between 3 and 5 days. But it's not really heavily marketed as a specific type of fermentation. Like, we could invent a name for it and say, okay, this is extended. Some crazy scientific word to it, fermentation, but it's just solid, solid, sweet, complex coffees, and we want the attention to be at the origin, the producer, the region, the quality, and also having a heavy impact. I mean, we have nothing against a really amazing one bag lot, but we know that specialty has an impact when it's more massive than just a competition, or a very expensive 1 bag, 2 bag, 5 bag lot. Specialty has to have volume in order to have a social impact. Nobody's going to change the world with half a container. Well, we're not going to change the world with how many containers we can do, but the more the merrier. And if we want to have an impact in the areas that we work, we need to be able to have an impact with enough volume and enough farmers. And that's where we've kind of gone away a little bit from focusing on very small, weird lots.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's cool. I'm glad I asked that question. I actually hadn't thought of it until we started chatting.
Hmm.
So that's very interesting. You
And
know,
and by the way, like all fermentations are anaerobic by their nature. Once you
okay.
have once you have a mass of coffee after a couple of centimeters and a couple of hours of fermenting, there's no oxygen there. So the whole idea of the anaerobic fermentation, I think it's an interesting debate. It's an interesting debate.
Well, there you have it. That that is the debate. Well, I mean, that makes sense, right? There's only so much air can get through a large or even a small amount of coffee while it's there in mucilage and
Yeah.
fermenting. Um, and I learned, traveling down there for me is always an opportunity for education, and I've always approached my traveling in that regards, like, stay humble and go down to learn. And, and just talking to right now, is in lieu of being able to travel down, but I've learned something new today, so thank you. Tectonic Coffee, part of our sort of the way we came up with the name was the Earth is always evolving and moving, and like tectonic plates that we as a company, me as a human, I as a
Oh, cool.
human is always evolving and growing, and yeah, so uh, super valuable. But yeah,
Oh,
we'll
I'm glad it
probably
was interesting.
yeah, no, it was really good. And I think get onto your marketing team, man. Create a name for that 5 day, 3 day, 5 day fermentation before someone else
uh,
does.
Yeah, we'll stick to where the coffee comes from and just delivering amazing coffee. Hopefully,
Yeah, do that. You do you, and let them be them.
yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks for coming in. Don't jump off just yet. I'll turn off all the recording devices and say a proper
Say
goodbye.
goodbye. Yeah,
But
perfect. No, it was a pleasure being here, and I'm sorry for my bulky headphones and my lack of setup. But yeah, it's been a pleasure talking and recording this. So I'm glad people hopefully enjoy it.
yeah, Permagino coffees. Check them out.